Gritty sports fans, it's time to...
Call me Villains of Sports!
Well, hello, folks, and welcome again to another edition of Talking Sports right here on WACN, your local television station. And tonight we got a special treat. We have with us Mr. Charlie Thornton. Mr. Thornton was involved with the University of Alabama for some 20-something years. A lot of you know him as co-host of the Bear Bryant Show. He was an associate athletic director over non-revenue sports. He's just been around football and universities around all over the South. And Mr. Thornton, we're glad to have you with us tonight.
Keith, I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here.
Now, as I told folks, you worked with Coach Bryant. I guess that's what really interests me a whole lot. That's I was about to say. Of course, I'm a real big Alabama fan, and anytime being around or talking with anybody dealing with Alabama or Coach Bryant just really fascinates me. Now, you worked with him, did you say, I think you were telling me a while ago, about 22 years?
Well, I worked with Coach Bryant a little over 18 years.
Okay.
I worked at the University 22 and a half. But, I went there in 1964, and I left a time or two in there. I went to the University of Miami.
Right.
I forget what year it was, but it was a little story there is that I left and went down there and stayed about 6 months, and things weren't working out, and my wife fell off the roof of the house and so forth and so on. Anyway, they didn't want to move to Miami. It's what it brought down to. But the funny thing was that they put a hiring freeze on Governor James, James, who's of course in Auburn, great All-American at Auburn. But when I came back to Alabama, the hiring freeze was still on, and Coach Bryant though could still hire me because I had been there and had come back and something. And I wrote to Fob and thanked him for the first time I had ever written an Auburn man to thank him for, for my job still being available at the University of Alabama because Coach Bryant hadn't been able to replace me while I was gone.
All right. Now, correct me on some of this stuff I'm wrong. I've just jotted down some facts that I've scraped around and came up with. Now, you were from Tulane or had been working down there?
Yeah, well, I went to Arkansas State University. That's where
me and you have a little bit of that in common there.
Right, you've been from Truman. And my first job was at Tulane University, and I worked there for 3 years, and Coach Bryant at that time called me, in fact, the second year I was there, I guess, 1961, and he didn't know me from Adam's house cat, but Fred Russell, the very distinguished sports columnist and sports editor of the Nashville Banner, they were very good friends going back to the days when Coach Bryant was on the staff at Vanderbilt, and Fred had recommended me to Coach Bryant, and he called and offered me a job, and it was like the first game of the season at Tulane. I was fixed to walk out the door and fly to California to advance our game, and Coach Bryant called and wanted to know if I'd be interested to come to work for him, and I said, well, I certainly would, thinking he was talking about the end of the year or something, and when he said, could you be here next Monday, I kind of choked up, and I said, and I don't know why, sometimes you say something that later on you're so glad you did, but you weren't smart enough to think about it. But I said something to him along the lines of that, Coach Bryant, if I was working for you now, you wouldn't want me to leave you this time of the year. And he said, I certainly would, and I appreciate that. Thank you, and hung up. Well, all the way flying out to California, I was kicking myself, because Tulane was not, we went 3-6-1, 2-8-0-10 the 3 years I was there. Ooh. And so, it was not a fun time from the standpoint of winning football games. So things rocked on. Anyway, I left Tulane and went with the NCAA. And while I was with the NCAA, Coach Bryant got in touch with me again and had not really done anything down at Alabama and asked me if I'd be interested. And I said, yes, I would. And so he said, well, I'll call you at home. I was living in Kansas City, and I said, okay. So I got back to Kansas City, and I was afraid to go out at night.
Right.
He'd call and I wouldn't be there or something, and that went on for like 3 months. And finally he called, and they were in Hot Springs, Arkansas, he and Mrs. Bryant, and said he's sorry to be so late getting to me, but he'd been out big dogging it, as he called it, with some of his friends out in California. And so anyway, make a long story short, that's when we got together.
And it's my understanding that there's a pretty nice setup in the PR department when you went down there. Everything was in just beautiful, great, up to the date.
Well, when I went down for an interview, to start with, my timing was really good on that particular situation, because the day I flew down for an interview, I had read in the paper this morning Coach Bryant had just gotten his settlement from the Saturday Evening Post on the Bryant Butts,
Yes, sir.
And he and Sam Bailey picked me up at the airport there in Tuscaloosa, and we started driving in town, and Coach Bryant was driving. And I know that's about a 15-minute drive normally. It seemed like Coach Bryant was going about 5 miles an hour. And it was the longest. I didn't know what to say much or anything to him, and I was in awe of him at that time, like everybody else is. And so finally, I said something. I was sitting up in the front seat with him, and I said, "Coach, how'd they go about paying you off on the on your settlement you got from Saturday Evening Post?"
Pretty good size settlement, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And he reached over and he patted his pocket, like his coat pocket, and he said, "I got it right in there." So he drove on, kept driving, didn't say anything else, and so I didn't bring it up. Nobody said anything. So we'd driven on. It seemed like 5 minutes. I'm sure it wasn't 30 seconds. And he reached in his pocket, he fumbled around, and he pitched this yellow thing over on the seat. And I looked at it, and I reached down and picked it up. It was a Western Union money order for $300,000. Well, you know what $300,000 was back then.
Right.
Was a lot of money, and so what I'm saying is, the day I went to interview, he was in a really good frame of mind, probably the best he'd ever be in. But he said when we got on into the office, he wanted me to go upstairs and look things over and see what I thought. So I went upstairs and looked at the offices, and I walked in there, and it was, I tell you, these were pre-Civil War stuff they had in there. The desk wouldn't open. They had an old typewriter with keys missing on it, and it was terrible. So I went back downstairs, kind of depressed about it, and I said, he said, "Well, what'd you think about office up there?" I said, "Coach, I just couldn't work under those circumstances." He said, "What do you mean?" I told him about it. He said, "Well, hell, we can buy stuff, can't we?" I said, "Yes, sir, we can buy stuff."
Okay. Oh, goodness. So now you co-host